Today, Aunt Mo is going to talk about wine yeast specifically, how synthetic yeast and natural yeast are different. There are quite a few members who are still confused, wondering if you can only use bread yeast for fermentation, or if for making wine you must use yeast that is specifically for wine. In reality, fermentation is actually very diverse. We can use a variety of ingredients. Whether it is synthetic or natural, yeast is fermented in a process to create alcohol, which is an alcoholic beverage that makes you intoxicated. Let's take a closer look and learn more about the unique properties of synthetic yeast, as well as the distinctive properties of natural yeast. Let's start with synthetic yeast. Synthetic yeast can actually be divided into two types. Aunt Moo won't mention any brand names. We'll just separate them into two categories. The first type of synthetic yeast is the kind we use for making bread, and there are many different brands. I want to point out that each brand gives off a different yeast aroma, friends. For those who want to follow Aunt Moo's recipe, try to use the same brand that I use because I've already selected which brand is most suitable for making wine. Some brands have a very strong smell, and when you use them to ferment wine, that pungent odor is hard to get rid of. Now, let's talk about the type used for making bread. This one is inexpensive and easy to find. You can buy it at most markets because it's commonly used for general baking. It's used for all kinds of bread. Its appearance is in small round granules. Take a look, everyone. Here, this is what it looks like. Bread yeast has small round granules like fish eggs, just like this. When you use bread yeast and add it to the dough before making wine, it rises faster than wine yeast. However, if you use bread yeast to ferment wine, it will produce less alcohol compared to using wine yeast. So we need to understand and distinguish which type we want so we can choose the right one for our needs. Now, when it comes to yeast for making wine, there are many different brands available on the market. This is a specialized yeast. The appearance of wine yeast is different from bread yeast, my friends. Wine yeast comes in straight sticks, like sugarcane stalks, not in small round granules like fish eggs. They are stick-shaped, more like sugarcane, so the difference is quite clear. When you use wine yeast and test it before making wine, it revives more slowly than bread yeast. However, once it becomes active, wine yeast can work for a longer period than bread yeast. For example, with bread yeast, if you ferment for 7 days, you won't see any bubbles anymore because the yeast has stopped working. This is a specific characteristic because bread yeast is less active than wine yeast. Wine yeast rises slowly, but when we use it to ferment wine, it works for a much longer time than bread yeast. I've already tested this myself. Wine yeast can keep fermenting and working for up to 2 weeks, even up to 20 days. I've tried it myself. The characteristic of wine yeast is that it produces alcohol. As its name suggests, it's called wine yeast for a reason. That's exactly why it produces more alcohol than bread yeast. So now we understand that. We've now learned about two types of synthetic yeast, bread yeast and wine yeast. The first one is bread yeast, which you've already heard about. The second is wine yeast, which you've also heard about. The third is sourdough starter. Sourdough starter is known for its widespread use in various communities. Is very well known and widely used as people use sourdough starter to make local rice wine, or what is essentially community brewed liquor. This time we're making wine, friends, and you can actually use either Pang Lukmak or Pang Sato. They both come in these dough-like balls depending on the region. There are both Pang Lukmak and Pang Sato, so you need to distinguish which type you want to use. Today I'm using Pang Lukmak because I prefer it. It gives a sweeter, more fragrant aroma. Pang Lukmak tends to be more aromatic and sweeter than Pang Sato because with Pang Sato, after fermenting, sometimes it ends up tasting like Sato liquor, and many people don't like its smell. So I use Pang Lukmak for fermenting instead. For Pang Lukmak, we need to grind it into a fine powder before mixing it with the wine. It works rather slowly, friends. When you add the powdered Pang Lukmak, it can take up to 2 days before it starts to rise and become fluffy. But once it starts working, it can keep fermenting for a long time, up to 20 days, friends. It might even go beyond 20 days, but I don't recommend letting it ferment for more than 20 days, friends, because it will turn bitter and won't taste good, and it's hard to fix. We'll talk more about this in the next step, how adding more or less will affect the outcome. Let's learn about this together. Now, let's talk about the ingredient that helps produce alcohol first. Earlier, I mentioned the puppy rice flour and sato rice flour. What's the difference between them? There's also another one. Come in here. It's sold all over the country. Friends, you can even find it at 7-Eleven. Department stores or fresh markets also carry it, but the prices will vary. If you buy it at a fresh market, it's usually quite cheap. If you buy it at a supermarket or department store, the price tends to be higher. It really depends on what's convenient for you. Or if you want to make it yourself, that's no problem either. When I ferment according to my recipe, I use one jar like this. If you buy it in a bag, you can divide it up like this. As we've discussed about fermenting with cow mac fermented rice, right? It gives a different flavor as well. Friends, fermenting with flour, luk pang, fermentation starter, pang sato rice wine yeast, or fermenting with cow mac, when you ferment it into wine, there's a downside. It makes the liquid cloudy. It will make the liquid cloudier than fermenting with synthetic yeast because it contains starch. Do you get what I mean? It contains starch, whether it's luk pang, pang sato, or cow mac. They all have starch in their ingredients, which is why the liquid turns cloudy. But fermenting wine with luk pang, pang sato, or cow mac gives it a fragrant and sweet flavor, friends, because the flavor has already been prepared in the pang sato or luk pang. They've already mixed in recipes and various herbs to season it for us. So we get the fragrance and sweetness from the starter that's already been mixed in. As for me, I don't know how to mix it myself. I just buy it. But since it gives a delicious flavor that I like, I use it regularly. Now, let's talk about choosing which method to use when making wine, like which recipe uses synthetic yeast and what kind of flavor you get from it. I explain all of this in my video. I cover everything in my wine making tutorial. In each video, I clearly mention if I'm fermenting with luk mac starch. You'll know whether it's fermented with the starter or with synthetic yeast and what kind of flavor you'll get. I explain it all. So, friends, go watch each video. If I were to explain everything in just one video, it would take 3 hours and still not be finished. Now, let's skip ahead past the starter since we already know its properties. This time, let's take a look at natural yeast, friends. Natural yeast can actually be obtained from a variety of sources, friends, whether it's from herbs or fruits, but I, Tamu, will choose the ones that are easy to use and easy to find. What I use most often is pineapple peel. Friends, pineapple peel is easy to find at any local market, or if you buy a pineapple to eat. After peeling it, don't throw the peel away. You can save it for many uses. If you're worried the pineapple peel will rot before you get to use it, just clean it, let it dry, then cut it into pieces, or let it dry in large pieces and put it straight into the freezer. But most of the time, I usually cut it into pieces first. Cut it into pieces first and let it dry, or you can use a cloth to absorb the moisture. After that, put it in a bag and store it in the freezer, about 100 to 300 grams per bag for convenience. When you need to use it, just take out 100 grams from the freezer and mix it right away. You can use this method for both types, for both tape and wine. As I mentioned earlier, the first natural ingredient is pineapple peel, which is commonly used and easy to find. In Thailand or even in other countries, pineapples are available all year round. The next natural ingredient is raisins. You can use both black and golden raisins. They're easy to find in any local market. Friends, they're sold everywhere. In every province, both black and golden raisins can be used. Raisins give a fragrant sweetness, friends. When you use them to ferment wine, you'll get a smooth, mellow flavor, and a lovely aromate won't have that yeasty smell, friends. If you use synthetic yeast, no matter how you ferment it, there will always be a yeast odor. So when Auntie Moo teaches how to ferment wine using synthetic yeast, she usually recommends adding syrup as it helps mask the yeast smell. Now, when fermenting with raisins, friends, you can check each of Auntie Moo's recipes to see for each type of wine whether we use raisins, synthetic yeast, or natural yeast, and in what quantities. These are actual recipes, friends. So if you follow them exactly, when you finish fermenting the wine, you'll get the same taste every time. Now, let's look at what happens if you add too much or too little yeast. If you use synthetic yeast, friends, and you add less yeast than the amount Auntie Moo's recipe calls for if you follow some other recipe, I can't guarantee whether the amount of yeast is suitable for that recipe or not. Auntie Moo can't guarantee it if it's someone else's recipe. But if you follow Auntie Moo's recipe and you add less yeast than what I've specified, the fermentation won't be complete, friends. The mixture just won't be balanced at all. There won't be any alcohol. Many of you have asked, Auntie Moo, why doesn't my wine have any alcohol? Why is the alcohol content so low? So go back and check whether you added the yeast according to my recipe, or if the yeast you use has lost its potency or expired. There are several factors to consider if your wine doesn't develop alcohol, and you'll need to look into those. I'll teach you more about this in the next video, otherwise this one will get too long. Now, can you add too much yeast? Auntie Moo, what happens if you add too much? You will. Oh, and what about the yeast smell? If you add too much yeast, it won't increase the alcohol content. The recipe needs to be balanced. You can't just say, oh, I'm making this wine recipe, so I'll add half a kilo of yeast to get more alcohol. That's not how it works, otherwise there wouldn't be a recipe, right? Please, friends, just follow the recipe. If you add too much yeast, I'm telling you, it's very hard to fix. The taste of the yeast will be overpowering, and when you ferment it, it won't taste good at all. A lot of fans have asked about this. So today I'm making this video because members from all over Thailand, and so that friends everywhere can understand and distinguish which things can be used to make wine and know what can be used as a substitute. Because in some areas, people can't buy synthetic yeast, so they wonder what they can use instead for fermenting wine. Today, I'm here to teach you all about it. I'm sharing some really in-depth knowledge with you today, friends. If there's anything you still don't understand, just rewind and watch it again and take notes if you need to. I, Pamu, I'm speaking clearly and direct everything I know. I'm sharing with you, holding nothing back. If you've watched my video and found it enjoyable or useful, please give it a like to support me and share it widely so that other members can also learn about this. The process of fermenting wine or making different types of yeast, please make sure to distinguish between them. You won't find this kind of free teaching anywhere else. I really want everyone to gain as much knowledge as possible from this. I, Pamu, would also like to greet all my fans, both those living abroad and those in Thailand. That's all for this video. Until we meet again. Goodbye.